Welcome to the AI Applied podcast. Today on the podcast, we have the pleasure of being joined by the legendary Jared Spataro, the Chief Marketing Officer, AI at Work. Jared, we're super stoked to have you on the podcast. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what exactly you do over at Microsoft and a little bit about your role?
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Gosh, my role is a little bit of everything right now, but the focus is how we can take AI and apply it to people's work and both reinvent how jobs work and how kind of corporations work. We really think there's a big idea here that we can work on together.
Awesome. Yeah, Jared, no, thanks for joining. We were excited about this. I know that you are all announcing some huge things that I want to get into at Ignite, but the first thing I wanted to ask you, because I was reading some of your newsletter and everything else, and you have this cool take on it that I think you all are really going for at Copilot. So I was thinking that Copilot is everywhere these days, right? I mean, everybody, because Microsoft Suites has been, Microsoft Suite has already been built into everybody's workflow since the dawn of time, it feels like, right? But like now with this new Copilot, this new age of generative AI and everything else, people I think have really high expectations, especially for Microsoft, right? And especially because you guys sort of set the standard for office work and things like that, right? Everybody just sort of, we even sort of say Excel and Word and PowerPoint and everything else. But before we get into what you're announcing, and what you guys have announced at Ignite and some super cool stuff, can you talk about a little bit about what I saw in your newsletter? You have this cool term, this AI native mindset, and how companies have to think differently about their work with AI. What's the difference that because we talk about it all the time on this podcast, would love to hear from you. Like, what do you mean by that, sort of how they have to think differently about it?
Well, I think a lot of our habits at work have been developed by a combination of the structures that we put in place, and those structures largely kind of came out of post-World War II types of, ways of thinking about organizing organizations. So that's one big input. And then the other big input is the tools that we use. The tools both provide power for us, but they also provide constraints. And what we see is when people take the AI tools and they kind of like incrementally apply them to the way the structures are set up and the way they already work, maybe the flow of their work, their workflow today, they kind of get incremental benefits. And most people in that case kind of say, oh, that's nice, but it feels like a nice to have. It doesn't feel like it transforms anything. But when we see people who take this different approach and say, well, wait a second, what if I throw away those strictures for a moment? And I just think about how I would try to get to my outcomes, get to my ends with these new means, then we really see some pretty transformative things. And people start to realize, wow, I didn't realize how much I was bound down by the constraints I essentially had kept on myself. If I break free of those shackles, sky's the limit. So that's the AI native mindset that I speak of, when I talk to people.
Love that. Yeah, no, I think that mindset's so important. Okay, Jared, the thing that everybody is so excited to hear about and so excited about the big announcement you guys just made at Ignite is, of course, the autonomous agents that are getting built into Copilot. You have 2 new autonomous agents in Dynamics 365. A lot of exciting stuff. Talk to us about this and I guess what you're most excited for with all of that.
Oh gosh, there's so much going on here. Let's first take a moment to frame it all. What's a Copilot? From our perspective, a Copilot really is an agent, but it's a very special type of AI agent. It's an agent that is bound to an individual. It understands that person. It understands that person's context, their work. It gets better every day, not just as they use the agent, but preferably as they just get their work done. So in many ways, it's observing what's happening. It becomes in many ways kind of this agent that contains, that treasures the context of what a person does. And that's incredibly valuable. It's meant to be a personal assistant is the easiest way to explain it to people who are kind of new to the domain. But we interestingly kind of faced a challenge as we developed this over the last 18 months. Number one, people had very high expectations for what a personal assistant could do. Can it do everything? Can it make bread? Can it like shine my floors for me? We needed a way to kind of communicate, well, it does many things well, but you need to add kind of additional functionality. We almost needed a package or a container for that functionality. And then the second big challenge that we faced is when you have a Copilot, an AI agent that's focused on the individual, it has boundaries. When you start to bump up into processes or places like a meeting where you're in a shared context, it became somewhat confusing. Is that your Copilot or my Copilot? Are our Copilots talking to each other? How does this work? And so when we looked at these two things, we realized another construct is going to be very helpful for us. And that's where we came up with the construct of an agent. For us, we think of an agent almost being like the apps of the AI era. They're the way that you load up your Copilot with additional capabilities. They're the way that you start to share context with other people in a very simple type of format. So then we get into, what types of agents are there? Well, there are very simple agents, agents that you can just ask a question of and they will respond with an answer. And then there are very interesting agents, like you say, that are autonomous, that kind of sit there and wait for triggers in your environment and go off and do things. And it is that idea that agents provide so much richness that we're very excited about. We've got lots of agents. We've introduced, as you said, over the last kind of 30, 45 days, a lot of agents. We have agents that we're introducing here at Ignite. But I'd focus in on just one that seems so simple, but is really powerful. We introduced an interpreter agent, for instance, that sits in Teams. Anyone in a Teams meeting can use it. And this is different than anything we've ever seen before. What it allows you to do is to switch on the language you want to hear the interpretation in, and the agent actually takes the audio stream. There's about a 5-second lag, and it will produce the speech in the new language in the voice of the person who spoke it, which is one of those like, wow. I speak Chinese, so I was doing it with my colleagues the other day, and to hear my colleagues speak Chinese fluently without an accent in their voice, 5-second lag, it was this moment when I realized, wow, but an agent can do that. I got it. Okay, that's a pretty interesting scenario.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's because we are talking a ton about agents all the time. Agents are in the news. We have, Anthropic, I think, got out there early, and we hear OpenAI, and we hear, Salesforce, all these people. But these are all great tools out there. But I think, at least, for me going out into the world and Jaeden talking to a ton of people as well, the adoption is going to be a lot of times first through Microsoft, just because you're so ubiquitous, right? And people they don't want to leave and go find these new systems. And so when you guys are building out agents, the thing that I was so excited to talk to you about on this front is you are now you're going to be dealing with, I don't know the number of people using Microsoft. I mean, clearly it's in the hundreds of millions, but a lot of things that we see is sort of this, it's not just about sort of using something with a new tool. It's actually like really changing behavior. And what I loved about, Mustafa Suleyman, who's CEO of Microsoft AI, if that's how you say it, I was at the launch when he was talking about Copilots and the new way of talking about it. And there's this new sense of, it's not just a new feature on a product. It is really a friend. It's sort of almost a compassionate companion that you can talk to. And I think that with agents is where people's heads start spinning around. Like, is this something that people like? The translation usage is phenomenal. Are you kind of talking about something where there's like a lot of different agents, and how does this work differently from just typing in something and saying, hey, go find me this in a sort of a more typical Copilot chatbot or something like this? Are these things that are existing? Give me a sense of like the interface and what people are seeing when they're looking at something that they've been looking at for since the dawn of time, which is their Microsoft interface.
Yeah, you bet. I'll use some concepts or some phrases and then try to unpack those for a moment. We talk about Copilot, as this personal assistant being the UI for AI. And that, it's got a nice alliteration to it, but like,
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
What does it mean? Our perspective is as follows. There will be hundreds, thousands of agents out in the world, maybe tens of thousands of agents out in the world, even to get our daily work done, as a marketer or as a finance professional or something. You're going to use lots of agents. We'll talk more about those in a moment. But the big question is kind of, how do you interact with those? How do you make sense of those? And our perspective is that it is your personal assistant, your Copilot, that will do that. We think that Copilot essentially becomes the aggregation point. It becomes the orchestration layer to help you interface with these agents. Because if your job as a human is to work with tens, dozens, hundreds of agents, all of a sudden you've got a new problem, which is like, how do I keep track of these things? Like, what do I do? So I'll just boil it down to a really simple example. When you ask Copilot today, and we showed this at Ignite, when you ask Copilot, hey, I'm getting ready for a customer meeting. Can you do me a favor? Can you pull all the public data on this person I'm going to meet with that you can find? And can you also pull all the CRM data that we have access to? So I just have kind of a comprehensive view of this customer before I meet with them. Well, what will happen and what is happening is that Copilot recognizes, to pull public data, I had to go to the LinkedIn agent and query about this individual and see if I can make a match. And if I can find information I can bring back. And to find the kind of internal data, I need to ask the agent who is familiar with and has access to our CRM data. And then I need to weave those things together. And it is the agents that provide the data, and it is Copilot that weaves it together into something that it knows you will understand. It knows your job. It knows what you're trying to accomplish. That orchestration, we think, is where the magic happens. And that is how people will experience it. It's both Copilot choosing the right agent for you and then orchestrating the retrieval of the information, the interleaving or interweaving of the information, and presenting in a way that makes sense in your context. And that's really powerful. And that's why we think this kind of like Copilot plus agents world has so much promise. Is without one or the other, you end up with a little bit of a lopsided equation. But when you have the two, you kind of have the equivalent of a smartphone and apps. Those two things made sense for people. They were simple concepts, and they really kind of kicked off a brave new era of mobile. And we think that's happening here with AI.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we believe that there's a ton of incredible stuff happening with AI. I want to get into this more, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about maybe the concerns that some people may have around this. I would love to hear your take on this. A lot of people, when they hear agents and they hear agents are going to be kind of autonomously doing tasks for them and working, in fact, I hear a lot is people saying, they're kind of concerned for their job security. Like, oh my gosh, like, are these agents just going to, are we going to bring them in? I'm going to start using them. It's going to learn everything I'm doing and it's going to replace me and my department. And eventually it's just going to be kind of these AI agents that run the company. Talk to us a little bit about where you see agents fitting in with the role of work in the future, people replacing people, and kind of how you look at that.
Yeah, there's a lot to be learned as we kind of study the impact these things have on organizations. But we'll say this, we are definitely seeing in these AI native, not just individuals, but AI native firms, organizations, a different organizational structure, a different operating kind of set of processes and cultures. The observations we make are as follows. It turns out that these, the combination of Copilot and agents essentially give generalists more power than they've ever had. They do allow a generalist to staff up. They provide every generalist with the equivalent of a chief of staff. And just as we talked about, an agent can bring real domain expertise, finance expertise. They can bring marketing expertise, design expertise, so much that can happen here. So what we envision isn't so much that these things take away a lot of jobs, but they will transform the jobs and how people get their work done. Dig down into a particular piece of research that I was intrigued by, probably about 12 months ago. We found that the people who did best with, at that time, Copilot were people who actually had managerial experience, because what they realized when they clicked into the analogy, they realized, oh, wait a second, I'm just delegating pieces of my work to this Copilot to go and do. And as they took that mindset, they could figure out, oh, I know how to delegate to people. I'm just going to delegate to machines now. And that mindset went further than kind of what you call a younger digital native applying their mindset of how to do Google search or how to use the web. It was a brand new mindset. So we think people will need to be retrained. They need to rethink how they get their work done. But the fallacy out there is that, when you have a machine that can do a human's work, it takes away all humans' work and everybody's on the curb, looking for jobs. It just hasn't happened that way. Since the beginning of our big industrial revolutions here in mostly modern times, even most recently with e-commerce, people were very worried that it would take away, where are all the shopkeepers going to do? It turns out, studies have shown there are 7 times more jobs created by e-commerce than destroyed. So it's one of these things where I think there is kind of a feeling of like, oh, will that take away work for me? And that's not what happens. It creates new opportunities. That's what we're most excited about. Our mission at Microsoft is to empower every person on the planet, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And we think that more is going to require different types of scaling laws. And that's what we see here in what we have with Copilot agents.
So I love this, Jared. It's like I set you up with that. Jaeden is so tired of hearing me talk like this. But you see, Jared is saying the same thing. The genius Jared. And this is the thing that I was like a lot of times when I go out and talk to companies, when I get that same question, around will this take jobs? First of all, it totally makes sense to me. But second of all, one of the things I ask is if you're a company that's not looking to grow, then yes, maybe this can start replacing members of your team. But if you're looking to grow, then every single one of your people is going to be augmented and be able to do 2x the work ultimately or something like that. I also love and am obsessed with this idea of it's a managerial behavior. One of the things that I'm always obsessed with, not to make this about me at all, I'm obsessed with, but when you start looking at best practices for like what we call quote unquote prompting, it sounds exactly about the best practices for, helping a new colleague get on board and,
Sure.
And learn the ropes and everything else. I feel like this is, if Microsoft can crack this nut, then the sky is the limit because you're already everywhere. And so I guess what I'm wondering, because you have access to all this research and everything too, is you're talking about sort of like upskilling people, but in a way it sounds like they already have, so many of them already have the skills. Like they had to be managers and everything else. So in your mind, is it more upskilling with how to deal with this? Because in my theory is that you don't have to be like someone, great at tech. You just have to be great at, as you say, managing. So Microsoft, I know, has to do a ton of this upskilling or get people to think about it in a new way. So is it a new skill, or is it recognizing that they kind of already have this skill? Like, how do you think about adoption, which is the big nut to crack, I think?
Yeah, I'll answer in a way that might seem a little bit strange, but I'll start this way. We all reason from our experience, right? Like we kind of take our experience and we infer things. That's how humans reason. It turns out that's how LLMs reason as well. My recent experience over the last 10 years is as follows. One of the most astounding things to me about my experience at Microsoft is when Satya Nadella came in and really drove a revolution at Microsoft, he didn't replace all the people. Certainly people have switched out and new people have joined. But the biggest thing he did was he changed our mindset. And it was like this major, it was such a learning time for me, because he came in with the same people, mostly with the same skills, and said, guys, we've got everything we need to be successful. We just have to change the way we look at the world. And he introduced at the time, the growth mindset has been Microsoft's kind of really big mindset shift. In so many ways, I think the AI revolution is also about a mindset shift more than it is necessarily even hard skill. And that's what you're getting to. It's about coming in and telling people, you already know how to do this, which is exactly what you said. But you think of dealing with computers like a calculator. You think you're going to, have it formulate the problem. You're going to press the buttons and it's going to give you the answer right. You don't think about people like calculators. You need to take the way you think about dealing with people and now apply it to this computing power. Because in essence, what we have here is if I were to like abstract away all the details, we have a technology that turns electricity into reasoning. Ta-da! Like that's, chips. We can talk about chips and cooling, all that type of stuff. But the input is electricity. The output is human-like reasoning. And the big question managerially, just like you say, is like, dang, if I had kind of unlimited reasoning power, human-like reasoning power, what would I do with it? How would I structure things? That's more a mindset shift than it is a skill shift. Certainly there'll be new skills required, but that's my take on this era. And that's why we're excited. We think we've experienced this at Microsoft. We've seen the power of that mindset shift. And we think, man, what if the whole world could make that mindset shift around this technology?
I love that. Yeah, I think the mindset is so critical to really adopting it. Yeah, I would love to hear about, and I think this will help, people get on board if they're not already, and help make that mindset shift. But would you be able to tell us about some success stories of people using it, and maybe how you kind of see this, the ways you think this is going to transform business, workflows, make some really big impacts in some of the areas? You shared the example of the translation, which I think is phenomenal. Wondering if there's any other interesting cases or success stories you've seen.
Oh, a lot. Yeah, a lot. Let me start from the Copilot and then work out. Interestingly enough, I feel like over the last 2 years, I've learned a lot about even how businesses budget and think about, efficiency and productivity and things like that. I was so excited when we first introduced Copilot, because we had already started to do these tests where we could prove that we could save you minutes and hours. I thought, my goodness, I'm going to go to a business person and say, look at how many hours I can save you a week. Like, surely this is worth, 2 cups of coffee, a month. And the reality was, people said indisputably, Jared, you are saving us hours. We can actually prove that. But that does not create, like, we would call it OpEx budget. It doesn't create operating expense budget for me to use to buy your thing. And so over the last 2 years, what we've gotten into in terms of successes is we certainly are trying to help people be more efficient at their jobs. And that's the daily tasks of meetings and email and finding information. We continue to work on that. But the place where the focus has gone to has been business processes where you have very measurable kind of outputs and impacts. Sometimes those are to drive top line, types of impacts, revenue, sometimes bottom line. So now 2 examples. Internally, we have used Copilot, for instance, to boost our productivity per head in the sales organization. So using Copilot, we've recently concluded a study where we showed that we drove almost a 10% increase in revenue per head per seller.
Oh, wow.
That's a big deal for us. Those are measurable things. We've also seen people use it a lot in their customer service departments. So customer support types of things. This is one of the first places people go. How can I make my human agents more effective. Again, we've done that at Microsoft. We've increased our throughput in one particular group by 12%. You look at 10% on the top line, 12% on the bottom line, like you're starting to talk about real money that matters. We see people using it in other places to help their salespeople become more efficient as they work with their customers. So another customer that we have called Lumen projects, $50 million of savings because they feel like they can take out a lot of the administrative work of, for instance, updating a CRM system and doing kind of lead development and focus instead on selling time, like customer face time. So it is across the functions mostly that we see people. We see them using it in legal to do document comparisons and document drafting, document analysis. We see them using it in marketing, for instance. We have a great customer that's recently cut down what used to be a 7-month process down to a 7-week creative process for them to run campaigns. Most of this is just taking the technology, new mindset, like we talked about, and saying, how do we run something from step 1 to step 27? What steps can we rationalize, and where could we use this artificial intelligence inference reasoning capability to speed up the process?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I do think that this is what people run into. It's like, okay, so where? And I love this idea of this is saving me money, but how does this hit the OpEx? Jared Spataro, I know you have a super busy day, super exciting with all these releases. Thank you for taking some of your time and letting us drag you on AI applied. But how you feeling? You feeling good? You feeling good about today? You must be exhausted.
It's a very exciting time. It's a very tiring time too. But it's just a pleasure to be here. Thank you guys so much for the time.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for joining. And listen, everybody. So this is something to definitely check out. Obviously, it's going to be all over the news. Just go and see it for yourself. But again, if you are a Microsoft user, this is only good news to see what they're doing. Thank you to Jared for coming on the show. And listen, if you enjoyed this, please leave a rating and review. We always love that. And see you next time on AI Applied.